In the shadowed halls of Blackthorn Manor, a locked ivory tower guards a deadly secret. When Hercule Poirot arrives at the Gothic estate, he uncovers whispers of betrayal, hidden keys, and a murder disguised as fate. A secret will, a poisoned lord, and a family torn by greed. Each clue unravels a web of lies. Can Poirot pierce the fog of deception before the tower claims another victim? Chapter 1. The invitation to Blackthorn Manor. The autumn mist clung to the Devon countryside like a conspirator, veiling the hedgerows and blurring the outlines of ancient oaks. In the cushioned silence of a Rolls-Royce, Hercule Poirot sat with the fastidious elegance that defined him, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his moustache a perfect crescent of waxed precision. His gloved fingers rested lightly on the silver handle of his walking stick, which tapped a gentle rhythm against the floor, as though echoing the thoughts of his little grey cells. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the picture of English reliability, peered through the window, his face creased with unease. "Poirot," Hastings ventured, his voice low. "This whole affair feels dashed odd, don't you think? A letter from some grand lady we've never met, summoning us to a manor in the middle of nowhere, and not a word about why. I don't like it." Poirot's green eyes twinkled with amusement. "Mon cher Hastings, it is precisely the oddity that intrigues Hercule Poirot. Lady Blackthorn's letter was a masterpiece of discretion, urgent, yet vague, like a whisper in a crowded room. She speaks of a matter requiring delicacy, of a shadow over her family. Such shadows, they are the canvas upon which I paint the truth." Hastings shifted uncomfortably. "All the same, I'd feel better if we knew what we were walking into. Blackthorn Manor sounds like something out of a Gothic novel." "Patience, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice smooth as velvet. "The Gothic, it is merely a setting. The human heart, now that is where the true drama lies." The car wound through a narrow lane, and Blackthorn Manor emerged from the fog like a spectre. Its grey stone façade, pocked by centuries of wind and rain, loomed over the landscape, its pointed arches and gargoyles lending an air of brooding menace. At its northern end rose a slender tower, its pale, almost luminous stone a stark contrast to the manor's dour exterior. The Ivory Tower, as it was called, seemed to pierce the mist with an almost defiant grace. The Rolls-Royce crunched to a halt on the gravel drive, and a butler, tall and gaunt as a tombstone, appeared to open the door. His face was impassive, his eyes betraying nothing as he bowed. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, Lady Blackthorn awaits you in the great hall." They followed him through a heavy oak door into a cavernous hall, its walls lined with portraits of grim-faced men and women, their eyes following the newcomers with silent judgment. A vast chandelier hung above, its crystals dulled by dust, casting a feeble glow over the polished floor. At the far end, beside a roaring fire, stood Lady Eleanor Blackthorn, a figure of refined dignity. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her emerald gown shimmered faintly in the firelight. Yet her hands, clasped tightly before her, betrayed a nervous energy. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice clear but tinged with strain. "I cannot thank you enough for coming. I am in desperate need of your particular talents." Poirot bowed, his movements precise. "Madame, it is my honour to serve. Your letter spoke of a matter most grave. Perhaps you will enlighten us." Lady Blackthorn's gaze flickered to the butler, who stood like a shadow by the door. "Not here," she said softly. "Tonight, at dinner, when the others are present. It is a matter that concerns us all." "Others?" Hastings asked, his curiosity piqued. "My family and a few trusted associates," she replied. "They will arrive shortly. Until then, allow me to offer you the hospitality of Blackthorn Manor." The butler led them up a grand staircase to their rooms, each furnished with heavy velvet curtains and mahogany furniture that seemed to whisper of bygone eras. Poirot's room overlooked the ivory tower, and he paused at the window, studying its pale silhouette against the darkening sky. The tower was an anomaly, its smooth stone unmarred by the decay that touched the rest of the manor. It stood apart, aloof, as though guarding a secret. "Something about that tower gives me the creeps," Hastings said, joining him. "It's too perfect, too unnatural." "Unnatural, perhaps," Poirot mused, "but not without purpose." Lady Blackthorne spoke of a calamity, and her eyes, they lingered on that tower. "It is the key, I think, to this mystery." As they unpacked, Poirot's mind was already at work, piecing together the fragments of the scene. The mist, the manor, the lady's guarded words. He sensed a web of secrets, delicate and dangerous, waiting to be unravelled. And Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, was ready to begin. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. The dining room of Blackthorn Manor was a study in faded grandeur, its high ceiling adorned with intricate plasterwork that had begun to crumble at the edges, like the remnants of a once proud empire. A chandelier, vast and glittering, hung above a long mahogany table, its candles casting a warm but uneven light that danced across the faces of the assembled guests. The air was heavy with the scent of wax and roasted pheasant, but beneath the civility of clinking crystal and murmured pleasantries, there was a tension as palpable as the fog that pressed against the tall windows. Hercule Poirot, seated near the head of the table, observed the scene with the keen eye of a painter studying a canvas. His small, precise frame was immaculate in a tailored dinner jacket, his moustache a flawless arc of waxed perfection. To his right sat Captain Arthur Hastings, his honest face betraying a flicker of discomfort as he adjusted his tie, unused to the formality of such gatherings. Across from them, Lady Eleanor Blackthorne presided with the grace of a seasoned hostess, though her eyes betrayed a weariness that no amount of poise could conceal. The other guests, a curious assortment of family and confidants, formed a tableau that Poirot found endlessly fascinating. To Lady Eleanor's left was her brother-in-law, Sir Reginald Blackthorne, a retired colonel whose florid complexion and bristling moustache suggested a man more at home on a battlefield than in a dining room. His voice, loud and commanding, carried across the table as he recounted a tale of his military days in India, though his eyes darted frequently to his hostess, as if seeking her approval or her secrets. Beside him sat his daughter, Beatrice Blackthorne, a young woman of striking beauty, her auburn hair coiled in a style that was both elegant and defiant. Her sharp tongue and quick wit had already made an impression during the pre-dinner sherry, where she had dismissed her father's anecdotes with a cutting remark that left him spluttering into his glass. Yet her green eyes, so like Poirot's own in their intensity, held a spark of unease, as if she sensed the undercurrent swirling around the table. Next to Beatrice was Dr. Malcolm Vance, the family physician, a thin man in his late 40s with a scholarly air and a habit of adjusting his spectacles when nervous, which Poirot noted was often. His hands, pale and trembling slightly, betrayed a man ill at ease, though he masked it with polite nods and occasional murmurs of agreement. Across from him sat Clara Wentworth, Lady Eleanor's secretary, a woman so unassuming that she seemed to blend into the wallpaper. Her mousy brown hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her eyes, behind thick glasses, darted about like those of a startled hare. Yet there was a quiet intensity to her, a watchfulness that Poirot found intriguing. Completing the circle was Victor Grayson, a distant cousin of the Blackthorne family and an archaeologist of some repute. His tanned face and easy smile spoke of years spent under foreign suns, and his tales of excavating Egyptian tombs had captivated the table during the soup course. Yet Poirot, ever attuned to the subtleties of human behaviour, detected a certain calculation in Grayson's charm, as if each anecdote were a carefully placed chess piece in a game only he understood. The meal progressed with the meticulous rhythm of a well-run household, the butler and footman moving with silent efficiency, yet the conversation, initially lively, had begun to falter, as if each guest sensed the shadow of Lady Eleanor's unspoken purpose. Poirot, sipping his wine with measured deliberation, allowed the silence to grow, knowing that it often coaxed secrets from reluctant lips. At last, as the plates from the fish course were cleared, Lady Eleanor rose, her emerald gown catching the candlelight like a jewel. The room fell silent, all eyes upon her. "My dear friends and family," she began, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of steel. "I have gathered you here tonight for a purpose beyond mere hospitality. You are all aware of the Ivory Tower, that curious folly built by my late husband, Lord Henry. For years it has stood locked and silent, a mystery even to me. But recently I have come to believe it holds a secret, one that threatens the very foundation of this family." A murmur rippled through the room, quickly stifled. Sir Reginald's face darkened, his hand tightening around his wineglass. "Eleanor, what is this nonsense?" he demanded, his voice booming. "The tower is nothing but Henry's whimsy, a monument to his eccentricity. You're letting old ghosts stir up trouble." "Ghosts, father?" Beatrice interjected, her tone sharp as a blade. "You've always scoffed at the tower, but I've seen you prowling near it after dark, looking as guilty as a schoolboy caught stealing biscuits." Sir Reginald's cheeks flushed a deeper shade of crimson. "Mind your tongue, girl. I was merely inspecting the grounds. The place is falling apart, and someone has to keep an eye on things." "Enough," Lady Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the bickering like a whip. "This is no time for petty squabbles. Monsieur Poirot, I have asked you here because I trust in your reputation for uncovering truths others cannot see. There is a secret within the Ivory Tower, and I fear it may lead to our ruin if it is not brought to light." Poirot inclined his head, his expression serene, but his eyes alight with curiosity. "Madame, I am at your service, but perhaps you could share a little more. What is the nature of this secret, and why do you believe it poses such danger?" Lady Eleanor hesitated, her fingers brushing the strand of pearls at her throat. "I cannot say precisely," she admitted. "Henry was, guarded about the tower. He spent hours there in the months before his death, locking himself away with his books and artifacts. He spoke of a legacy, something of immense value, but he never revealed its nature. Recently, however, there have been signs, strange noises at night, lights flickering in the tower's window. Someone is searching for that legacy, and I fear their intentions are not benign." Dr. Vance cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "Eleanor, are you certain this isn't simply the work of vandals? The village boys are known to trespass on the estate. Vandals do not move in silence, Malcolm," Lady Eleanor replied sharply. "Nor do they leave no trace. The tower's door remains locked, yet I am certain someone has been inside." Clara Wentworth's fork clattered against her plate, drawing every eye. She flushed, muttering an apology, but Poirot noted the way her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. Victor Grayson, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Fascinating," he said, his tone light, but his eyes keen. "It sounds like something out of a Gothic romance. Perhaps Lord Henry hid a pharaoh's treasure up there, eh?" His attempt at levity fell flat, and the silence that followed was heavier than before. Poirot's gaze swept the table, cataloguing each reaction. Sir Reginald's scowl, Beatrice's arched brow, Dr. Vance's nervous fidgeting, Clara's averted eyes, and Grayson's studied nonchalance. Each, he knew, was a piece in the puzzle, and he was determined to fit them together. "Madame," Poirot said at last, his voice soft but commanding, You have gathered a most interesting company. Each, I suspect, holds a thread of this mystery. I shall observe, I shall listen, and I shall uncover the truth. But I must ask, is there anyone else who might know of the tower's secret? Lady Eleanor's lips parted, then closed. No one, she said firmly. Only those in this room. And Henry, of course. But he is gone. Poirot nodded, but his mind was already turning over the possibility that she was mistaken or lying. The meal resumed, though the atmosphere remained taut, each guest retreating into their own thoughts. Hastings, ever the barometer of mood, leaned toward Poirot and whispered, "I don't like this one bit, old chap. There's something rotten here, and I don't mean the fish." "Patience, Hastings," Poirot murmured, his eyes never leaving the table. "The storm is gathering, but it is in the storm that truths are revealed." As the dessert course was served, a delicate lemon soufflé that went largely untouched, Poirot began to probe, his questions as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. To Sir Reginald, he inquired about the manor's history, learning of its centuries-old legacy and the Blackthorn family's pride in their lineage. To Beatrice, he asked about her father's late-night wanderings, eliciting a shrug and a cryptic remark about his debts and schemes. To Dr. Vance, he posed a question about Lord Henry's health in his final days, noting the physician's hesitation before claiming it was a sudden heart failure. Clara, when pressed about her duties, stammered that she handled only correspondence, though her flushed cheeks suggested otherwise. Grayson, ever charming, deflected Poirot's inquiries with tales of his travels, but his eyes lingered too long on Lady Eleanor, as if gauging her reactions. The evening drew to a close, and the guests dispersed to their rooms, their footsteps echoing in the vast halls. Poirot and Hastings lingered in the drawing-room, where a fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the portraits that lined the walls. "Well, Poirot," Hastings said, sinking into an armchair, "what do you make of it? Lady Eleanor's story about the tower sounds like something out of a penny dreadful, but she's clearly frightened. And the others, well, they're a rum lot, aren't they?" "Indeed, mon ami," Poirot replied, pacing slowly before the fire. "Each guest is a study in contrasts. Sir Reginald's bluster hides a fear. Beatrice's sharpness conceals a vulnerability. Dr. Vance's nervousness betrays a secret. Clara's timidity masks a purpose, and Grayson's charm. It is a mask, I think, for something more calculating. But it is the tower that holds the key. Why does it remain locked? What did Lord Henry guard so jealously?" Hastings frowned. "Do you think there's really a treasure up there? Gold, jewels, that sort of thing?" Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. "Treasure, Hastings, is not always gold. It can be knowledge, power, or a truth too dangerous to reveal. Tomorrow, we shall examine this ivory tower more closely. For now, let us retire and allow the little grey cells to work in silence." As they ascended the grand staircase, the manor seemed to settle around them, its creaks and groans like the whispers of secrets long buried. Poirot's mind, however, was far from restful. The dining room had been a stage, and each guest an actor playing a part. But whose role was that of the villain? And what was the prize hidden in the ivory tower? These questions, like the fog outside, would not clear easily. But Hercule Poirot was no stranger to piercing the mists of mystery. Chapter 3. The Locked Tower. The morning sun struggled through the persistent Devon fog, casting a pale, diffused light over Blackthorn Manor's sprawling grounds. Hercule Poirot stood before the ivory tower, his neat figure a stark contrast to the wild tangle of ivy that clung to the manor's walls. The tower itself, rising like a solitary sentinel, gleamed with an almost unnatural lustre, its smooth, pale stone untouched by the decay that marred the rest of the estate. Its single door, a slab of ancient oak reinforced with iron bands, was sealed with a modern lock that seemed an affront to its Gothic austerity. Beside Poirot, Captain Hastings shivered, pulling his coat tighter against the chill. "Dash it all, Poirot," Hastings muttered, his breath visible in the crisp air. "This place gives me the willies. It's as if the tower's watching us." Poirot's moustache twitched with the faintest hint of amusement. "Mon ami, it is not the tower that watches, but the eyes of those who guard its secrets. Observe, if you please, the lock. It is new, precise and, most importantly, unscratched. No one has forced their way inside." Hastings frowned, peering at the door. "Then how could anyone get in?" "Lady Blackthorne said the key was lost after Lord Henry's death." "Précisément," Poirot replied, his green eyes narrowing as he ran a gloved finger along the doorframe. "And yet, Lady Blackthorne speaks of noises, whispers, footsteps, in the night. If the key is lost and the lock unbroken, we must consider other possibilities." His finger paused, and he leaned closer, his expression sharpening. "Aha! Regardez, Hastings. A smudge, faint but unmistakable. Wax, from a candle, I think. Someone has been here, and recently." "Wax?" Hastings echoed, squinting at the barely visible mark. "Could be from years ago, surely." "Non, non," Poirot said, shaking his head. "The wax is fresh, not brittle. It was left within the past week, perhaps less. Someone stood here, in the dark, with a candle. They were careful, but not careful enough." Before Hastings could respond, Lady Eleanor emerged from the manor, her face pale but composed. She wore a heavy shawl over her morning dress, and her eyes darted to the tower with a mixture of dread and curiosity. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she greeted, her voice steady but soft. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough, madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "But my mind, it does not rest when there is a puzzle to solve. Tell me, this tower, when was it built, and for what purpose?" Lady Eleanor's fingers tightened on her shawl. "It was my husband's creation, built some 10 years ago, before his illness. Henry was consumed by it. He called it his sanctuary, a place for his studies. He was a scholar of history, you see, fascinated by antiquities and obscure texts. The tower was his retreat, locked to all but himself. And the key," Poirot pressed gently. "You said it was lost. Was it ever found, perhaps by another?" She shook her head, her pearls glinting in the weak sunlight. "No. After Henry's death, I searched his study, his rooms, everywhere. The key was gone. I assumed he took its secret to his grave." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And yet, you hear these noises. Tell me, madame, who else has access to the grounds at night? Servants, perhaps? Or visitors?" "The servants are loyal," she said quickly, then hesitated. "Though, the gardener mentioned seeing a figure near the tower last week. He thought it was one of the guests, but it was too dark to be certain." "Most interesting," Poirot murmured. "I should like to speak with this gardener, if I may." "Of course," Lady Eleanor said, gesturing toward the manor. "He is tending the roses this morning. I'll have him brought to you." As she departed, Poirot turned back to the tower, his gaze tracing its height to the narrow window near the top, its glass frosted and opaque. "Hastings," he said, "we must consider the possibility that the tower is not as impenetrable as it seems. A lock, a door, these are but obstacles to a determined mind." Hastings rubbed his chin. "You think someone's found a way in? But how, without the key?" "That, mon ami, is what we shall discover," Poirot replied, his voice tinged with anticipation. Later that morning, Poirot sat in the manor's library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy drapes that muted the daylight. The gardener, a wiry man named Thomas with soil-stained hands and a weathered face, stood before him, cap in hand. His eyes flickered nervously, as if unaccustomed to such scrutiny. "You saw a figure near the tower, Monsieur Thomas?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. Describe, if you please, what you saw. Thomas shifted his weight. 'Twas late, sir, nigh on midnight. I was checking the stables. One of the horses was restless. I saw someone moving near the tower, cloaked like, carrying no light. They was quick, sir, and kept to the shadows. Couldn't see their face, but they was smallish. Not tall like Sir Reginald or Mr. Grayson. Smallish, Poirot repeated, his fingers steepled. A woman, perhaps, or a slight man. Couldn't say, sir, Thomas replied. It was too dark, and they was gone afore I could get closer. Poirot nodded, dismissing the gardener with a courteous smile. As Thomas left, Hastings leaned forward in his chair. Sounds like a proper mystery, Poirot. A cloaked figure skulking about at midnight. It's like something out of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, Poirot said with a sniff, relies on theatrics and footprints in the mud. Hercule Poirot uses the little grey cells. This figure, they are no phantom. They are someone in this house, and they seek something within the tower. That afternoon, Poirot requested to speak with Clara Wentworth, the secretary, whose nervous demeanour at dinner had not escaped his notice. They met in a small parlour, its walls adorned with faded tapestries depicting pastoral scenes. Clara sat perched on the edge of a chair, her hands twisting a plain cotton handkerchief, her glasses slipping down her nose. Mademoiselle Wentworth, Poirot began, his voice as smooth as polished marble. You are Lady Blackthorn's confidant, no? You manage her affairs, her correspondence. You must know much of what transpires in this house. Clara's cheeks flushed, and she pushed her glasses up with a trembling finger. I only do my duties, Monsieur Poirot. I write letters, keep her schedule, that sort of thing. And yet, Poirot said, leaning forward slightly, the gardener saw a figure near the tower, a figure of your stature, perhaps. And I have learned from the housemaid that you were seen in the garden 2 nights ago, near the tower, long after the household was abed. Why, mademoiselle, were you there? Clara's eyes widened, and the handkerchief twisted tighter. I lost my brooch, she stammered. A small thing, silver, with a pearl. I thought it might have fallen in the garden. I was only looking for it. In the dark, without a lantern. Poirot's tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. Most curious. And did you find this brooch? No, she said quickly, too quickly. I gave up and went back to bed. Poirot leaned back, his expression unreadable. Merci, mademoiselle. That will be all for now. As Clara hurried from the room, Hastings shook his head. She's hiding something, Poirot. I'd wager my best hat on it. That story about the brooch. Poppycock. Perhaps, Poirot said, tapping his walking stick against the floor. But it is not what she hides that interests me most. It is why. The brooch, it is a convenient excuse, but a poor one. We must watch Mademoiselle Wentworth closely. As the afternoon waned, Poirot and Hastings returned to the tower, this time armed with a magnifying glass and a small notebook. Poirot examined the doorframe again, confirming the wax smudge and noting its position, low, near the lock, as if someone had knelt to inspect it. He then circled the tower, his eyes scanning the stone for any irregularity. The walls were smooth, almost polished, with no visible handholds or cracks. Look here, Poirot, Hastings called, pointing to a patch of earth near the tower's base. The ground's disturbed. Looks like someone's been digging. Poirot knelt, his movements precise despite the damp soil. The earth was indeed churned, but the marks were shallow, as if someone had scraped at it with a trowel or boot. Not digging, Hastings, he said. Searching. Someone was looking for something, perhaps a hidden entrance, or something dropped in haste. He stood, brushing the dirt from his gloves with a grimace. This tower, it is a fortress of secrets, but every fortress has a weakness, and Hercule Poirot will find it. As they returned to the manor, the fog began to thicken once more. wrapping the ivory tower in a shroud of mystery. Poirot's mind was alight with possibilities, each clue a thread in the intricate tapestry he was beginning to weave. The wax, the figure, the disturbed earth, all pointed to a truth hidden within the tower's pale walls. But whose hand had lit the candle, and what did they seek? These were the questions that would guide him, and he would not rest until they were answered. Chapter 4. The Whisper in the Night. The night descended over Blackthorn Manor with a stillness that seemed to amplify every sound. The creak of ancient timbers, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft rustle of leaves stirred by an unseen breeze. Hercule Poirot, however, was not asleep. He lay in his four-poster bed, the heavy velvet curtains drawn back just enough to let a sliver of moonlight spill across the room. His eyes, sharp and alert, were fixed on the ceiling, but his mind was elsewhere, sifting through the day's observations with the precision of a watchmaker. The wax smudge, the gardener's tale of a cloaked figure, Clara Wentworth's faltering excuse, all were pieces in a puzzle that refused to resolve. At precisely 2 a.m., a sound broke the silence, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like the beat of a distant drum, emanating from the direction of the ivory tower. Poirot's moustache twitched, and he sat up, his movements swift and silent. Slipping into his dressing gown, a masterpiece of burgundy silk, he retrieved his torch from the bedside table and padded to the door. He paused, listening, then crossed the hall to rouse Captain Hastings. "Hastings, mon ami," he whispered, shaking his friend's shoulder. "Awaken! The tower calls to us." Hastings blinked groggily, his hair askew. "What's that, Poirot? The tower? At this hour?" "Précisément," Poirot replied, his voice low but urgent. "There is activity where there should be none. Come, we must investigate." Grumbling but compliant, Hastings pulled on a coat over his pyjamas and followed Poirot down the grand staircase, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The manor was a labyrinth of shadows, the portraits on the walls seeming to watch their progress with silent disapproval. Outside, the fog had returned, thicker than before, wrapping the grounds in a ghostly veil. The ivory tower loomed ahead, its pale stone barely visible through the mist, like a phantom rising from the earth. As they approached, the tapping grew louder, a deliberate cadence that suggested purpose rather than accident. Poirot held up a hand, signalling Hastings to stop, and they crouched behind a yew hedge, the damp leaves brushing against their coats. The sound ceased abruptly, replaced by a faint scraping, as if something metal grazed against stone. Poirot shone his torch toward the tower's door, the beam cutting through the fog to reveal the same oak slab, its iron bands glinting dully. The wax smudge he had noted earlier was still there, but now it was joined by a fresh drip, glistening wetly in the light. "Someone was here, Hastings," Poirot whispered, his eyes gleaming. "And not long ago. The wax is still soft." Hastings peered over the hedge, his voice barely audible. "Do you think they're still here?" "Non," Poirot said, rising cautiously. "They have fled, but they have left us a gift, a clue to their presence." He approached the door, his torch sweeping the ground. The disturbed earth Hastings had noticed earlier was now marked by a single, clear footprint, small, narrow, and unmistakably that of a woman's shoe. Poirot knelt, examining it with care. "Most interesting," he murmured. "The heel is worn, suggesting haste or frequent use. This is no casual visitor." Hastings shivered, glancing around nervously. "This is getting eerie, Poirot. Footprints, wax, tapping in the night. It's like a ghost story." Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. "Ghosts, mon ami, do not leave footprints, nor do they require candles. This is the work of a living soul, one with a purpose we have yet to uncover." They circled the tower, but the fog obscured any further signs, and the window high above remained dark and unyielding. Reluctantly, They returned to the manor, the cold seeping into their bones. As they reached the great hall, a figure emerged from the shadows of the library doorway. Dr. Malcolm Vance, his face pale and his spectacles askew, clutching a medical journal as if it were a shield. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he stammered, his voice high with surprise. "What are you doing up at this hour?" "I might ask you the same, Docteur," Poirot replied smoothly, his eyes noting the physician's dishevelled appearance. "The library. It is an unusual place for reading at 2 a.m, non?" Vance's hands trembled, and he adjusted his spectacles unnecessarily. I couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. I thought a bit of reading might help." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone mild, but his gaze piercing. "And what troubles your mind, Doctor? The noises from the Ivory Tower, perhaps?" Vance's eyes widened, and for a moment, Poirot thought he might bolt, but the physician merely shook his head, muttering, "Noises? I've heard nothing. You must be mistaken." He retreated into the library, closing the door with a soft click. Hastings raised an eyebrow. "He's jumpy as a cat, Poirot. Do you think he's our midnight visitor?" "Possible," Poirot said, leading the way back to their rooms. "But Dr. Vance is a man of science, not stealth. The footprint, it suggests a woman, or a very small man. We shall see." The next morning, the dining room was subdued, the guests picking at their breakfast with little appetite. Lady Eleanor, seated at the head of the table, seemed distracted, her eyes drifting to the window, where the tower's silhouette was just visible through the thinning fog. Sir Reginald, his face still flushed from the previous night's brandy, grumbled about the damp weather, while Beatrice opposite him stirred her tea with a vigour that suggested suppressed anger. Clara Wentworth was absent, claiming a headache, and Victor Grayson, ever the charmer, regaled the table with a story of a Bedouin guide who had saved his life in the desert, though his eyes flicked too often toward Lady Eleanor. Poirot, sipping his café au lait, chose his moment carefully. "Mademoiselle Beatrice," he said, his voice cutting through Grayson's tale, "you spoke last night of your father's nocturnal wanderings. Have you perhaps also ventured near the Ivory Tower after dark?" Beatrice's spoon paused mid-stir, and her green eyes met Poirot's with a flash of defiance. "What are you implying, Monsieur Poirot? That I'm sneaking about like a thief? I have better things to do with my evenings." "And yet," Poirot continued undeterred, "you are observant, non? You notice things others do not. Tell me, what have you seen near the tower?" She hesitated, her lips tightening. "Nothing concrete," she admitted at last. "But father's been odd lately, more secretive than usual. He's always going on about the family's finances, how we're on the brink of ruin. I think he's been selling off heirlooms to cover his debts. If anyone's poking around the tower, I'd wager it's him looking for something to pawn." Sir Reginald slammed his fist on the table, rattling the china. "That's enough, Beatrice. I won't have you airing our laundry before strangers. My affairs are my own." "Are they?" Beatrice shot back, her voice sharp. "Then why were you seen near the tower last week, father, when you claimed to be in Exeter?" The room fell silent, all eyes on Sir Reginald. His face purpled, but before he could respond, Lady Eleanor intervened. "This is neither the time nor the place," she said, her voice icy. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you will conduct your inquiries with discretion." "Always, madam," Poirot replied, bowing his head. But his mind was racing, cataloguing the exchange, Beatrice's accusation, Sir Reginald's fury, and the absence of Clara, whose headache now seemed suspiciously convenient. After breakfast, Poirot sought out the housemaid who had mentioned Clara's late-night wanderings. She was a young woman named Mary, with a round face and a tendency to blush under scrutiny. They spoke in the scullery, where she was polishing silver with nervous energy. "It was 2 nights ago, sir," Mary said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was up late, mending a tear in my apron, when I saw Miss Wentworth in the garden, near the tower. She didn't have a light, but the moon was bright and I saw her clear as day. She was standing by the door, looking at it, like she was trying to decide something. And did she enter? Poirot asked, his tone gentle. No, sir, Mary replied. She just stood there a bit, then hurried back to the house. I thought it queer, her being out so late. Most queer, Poirot agreed, dismissing her with a nod. As he returned to the library, where Hastings was waiting, he mulled over the new information. Clara's story about the lost brooch was unravelling, and the footprint by the tower suggested a woman's involvement. But was it Clara or another? And what of Dr. Vance's midnight vigil in the library? Hastings, Poirot said, settling into a chair. We are surrounded by actors, each playing a part. The tower is the stage, and the secret it holds is the prize. But who is the director of this drama? That is what we must discover. Hastings nodded, though his expression was dubious. I still say it's a ghost story, Poirot. All this sneaking about in the fog, it's enough to make anyone's hair stand on end. Poirot chuckled softly. Fear not, mon ami. The only ghosts here are those of guilt and greed, and Hercule Poirot shall lay them to rest. Chapter 5. The Hidden Mechanism. The sun, struggling through the ever-present Devon fog, cast a muted glow over Blackthorn Manor, bathing the ivory tower in a light that seemed to accentuate its enigmatic presence. Hercule Poirot stood at its base, his immaculate suit, a stark contrast to the wild garden that encroached upon the tower's pristine stone. His eyes, sharp as a falcon's, traced the structure's contours, noting the seamless masonry and the solitary window high above, its frosted glass a barrier to prying eyes. Captain Hastings, ever at his side, shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering between the tower and the manor, as if expecting some unseen watcher to emerge from the mist. Poirot, Hastings said, his voice tinged with impatience. We've been over every inch of this door. No scratches, no signs of tampering. If someone's getting in, they must be a ghost or a magician. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of amusement at his friend's exasperation. Non, mon ami. There are no ghosts here, nor magicians, only cleverness. The human mind, it constructs barriers, but it also devises ways to circumvent them. We must think as Lord Henry thought when he built this tower. He stepped back, his head tilted as he studied the tower's height. The window, some 20 feet above, caught his attention once more. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to pass through, but its position suggested a possibility that had eluded him until now. Hastings, he said abruptly, we require a ladder. A tall one, if you please. A ladder, Hastings echoed, his brow furrowing. You're not thinking of climbing up there, are you? At your age, Poirot's eyes flashed with mock indignation. My age, Hastings, is but a number, and my mind is as agile as ever. Fetch the ladder from the gardener's shed. Vite, vite. Grumbling but obedient, Hastings trudged off, returning shortly with a sturdy wooden ladder, its rungs weathered but sound. With the help of Thomas the gardener, they positioned it against the tower's wall, the top rung just shy of the window. Poirot, with a surprising nimbleness that belied his fastidious demeanour, began to climb, his gloved hands gripping the rungs with care. Hastings, holding the ladder steady, watched with a mix of admiration and anxiety. Be careful, Poirot, he called. If you fall, I'll never hear the end of it. Fear not, Poirot replied, his voice steady despite the height. Hercule Poirot does not fall. At the window, he paused, his torch illuminating the frosted glass. He pressed against it, expecting resistance, but to his surprise, the pane gave slightly, a subtle shift, as if it were not fixed, but hinged. With delicate pressure he pushed, and a section of the window slid open, revealing a narrow compartment within the wall. Inside, Glinting in the torchlight was a small brass lever, its surface polished as if recently used. "Aha!" Poirot exclaimed softly, his satisfaction evident. He pulled the lever, and a faint click echoed from below, followed by the groan of wood and metal. Glancing down, he saw the tower's door swing inward, revealing a dark spiral staircase that ascended into shadow. "Hastings!" he called, descending with care. "The tower yields its secret. Come, we must explore." Hastings, wide-eyed, joined him at the door. "Good Lord, Poirot, how did you know?" "The little grey cells, mon ami," Poirot said, tapping his temple. "They see what the eyes do not. The window, it was too perfect, too deliberate. Lord Henry was a man of ingenuity, and this was his hidden gate." They stepped inside, the air cool and musty, carrying the faint scent of old paper and polished wood. The torchlight revealed a circular chamber, its walls lined with shelves that sagged under the weight of leather-bound books, their spines embossed with titles in Latin and Greek. Scattered among them were artifacts that spoke of Lord Henry's eclectic tastes: Egyptian scarabs, Roman coins, a jade figurine from the Orient, and, most striking, an ivory statuette of a hooded figure, its face obscured, but its presence oddly menacing. In the center of the room stood a heavy iron safe, its dial gleaming like a watchful eye. Hastings let out a low whistle. "This is no mere folly, Poirot. It's a vault, a treasure trove." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice thoughtful as he approached the safe. He ran his fingers over its surface, noting the absence of dust. "This safe has been touched recently, though the rest of the room has not. Someone has been here, and they knew of the hidden entrance." He turned to the shelves, his torch sweeping over the artifacts. His gaze lingered on the ivory statuette, its craftsmanship exquisite but unsettling. "Lord Henry collected more than curiosities," he mused. "These objects, they tell a story of a man obsessed with secrets, perhaps secrets worth killing for." Hastings shivered. "This place gives me the creeps. Let's get out of here before we're caught." "Caught?" Poirot said, raising an eyebrow. "Non, Hastings. We are the hunters, not the prey. But you are right. We must be discreet. We shall return to this chamber, but first we must learn who else knows of its existence." As they descended the staircase and stepped back into the fog, Poirot paused, his nose wrinkling. A faint scent lingered in the air. Lavender, delicate but distinct. He had smelled it before on Clara Wentworth's handkerchief during their interview. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, locking the door behind them with a soft click. That afternoon, Poirot gathered Lady Eleanor and the household in the drawing-room to report his findings, though he was careful to reveal only what served his purpose. "Madame," he said, bowing to Lady Eleanor, "the ivory tower is no longer a mystery. I have entered it and found a chamber filled with your late husband's treasures, books, artifacts, and a safe that I suspect holds the heart of this enigma." Lady Eleanor's hand flew to her throat, her pearls clicking softly. "You entered? But how?" "The key is unnecessary," Poirot interrupted gently. "Lord Henry was a man of cunning, and he devised a hidden mechanism. But I must ask, Madame, who else might have known of this entrance?" Her eyes widened, and she shook her head. "No one. Henry was secretive, even with me. He never spoke of a hidden way in." Sir Reginald, standing by the fireplace, snorted derisively. "This is preposterous, Eleanor. You're letting this foreigner spin tales. The tower's a folly, nothing more." Beatrice, seated on a velvet sofa, rolled her eyes. "Oh, father, do be quiet. If Monsieur Poirot says there's something in the tower, I believe him. You've been skulking about enough to know there's more to it than you let on." "Insolent girl," Sir Reginald snapped, but his bluster faltered under Poirot's steady gaze. Dr. Vance, hovering near the window, cleared his throat nervously. "Monsieur Poirot, are you certain the safe contains something dangerous? Perhaps it's just old papers, nothing more." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone neutral but his eyes noting the physician's pallor. "But papers, they can be more dangerous than gold, non?" Clara Wentworth, who had joined the gathering despite her earlier absence, sat silently, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, and he noted the faint scent of lavender that clung to her, stronger now than before. Victor Grayson, lounging in an armchair, watched the exchange with a faint smile, as if amused by the unfolding drama. "Madame," Poirot continued, addressing Lady Eleanor, "I shall need to examine the safe more closely, but it requires a combination. Do you know it?" She shook her head, her expression troubled. Henry never shared such things. If there is a combination, it died with him. "Very well," Poirot said, rising. "Then we shall proceed with caution. The tower has begun to speak, and Hercule Poirot listens." As the household dispersed, Poirot and Hastings retired to the library, where a fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room. Hastings sank into a chair, his face a mixture of awe and unease. "Well, Poirot, you've done it again. A hidden entrance. But what's in that safe, do you think? Jewels, documents." Poirot paced slowly, his walking stick tapping the floor. "It is not the contents alone that matter, Hastings, but the desire they inspire. Someone has entered the tower, someone who knew of the hidden lever. The lavender, it points to Mademoiselle Wentworth, but I suspect she is not alone in this game. There is a pattern here, a design, and we are close to its heart." Hastings frowned. "You think Clara's the key? She seems too timid to be sneaking into towers." "Timidity, mon ami, is often a mask," Poirot said. "And masks, they are what we must peel away. Tomorrow we shall return to the tower, and the safe shall yield its secrets, or someone else will." As the firelight flickered, Poirot's mind was already weaving the threads of the case. The footprint, the wax, the lavender, the hidden lever, into a tapestry that was beginning to take shape. The ivory tower was no longer a locked mystery, but its true secret remained elusive, and he would not rest until it was laid bare. Chapter 6. The Confession and the Clue. The afternoon light filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackthorn Manor's drawing room, casting a muted glow over the assembled household. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the very walls sensed the unravelling of secrets. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small, precise figure commanding attention despite his unassuming stature. His black patent shoes gleamed, and his moustache, a masterpiece of symmetry, seemed to quiver with the energy of his thoughts. Beside him, Captain Hastings sat rigidly, his honest face a mixture of curiosity and unease, sensing that Poirot was about to pull a thread that would unravel the entire tapestry of the mystery. The guests were arranged in a semicircle, their expressions a study in contrasts. Lady Eleanor Blackthorn, seated in a high-backed chair, maintained her regal composure, though her fingers betrayed her by clutching her pearls tightly. Sir Reginald Blackthorn, his face still ruddy from breakfast's heated exchange, stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed and his scowl deepening. Beatrice, perched on an ottoman, watched Poirot with a mixture of scepticism and intrigue, her auburn hair catching the light like a flame. Dr. Malcolm Vance hovered near the window, his spectacles slipping down his nose as he fidgeted with a handkerchief. Clara Wentworth, her mousy demeanour more pronounced than ever, sat with her hands folded, her eyes fixed on the carpet. Victor Grayson, lounging with an air of studied nonchalance, met Poirot's gaze with a faint, knowing smile, as if he alone understood the game being played. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and measured, "the ivory tower has begun to yield its secrets, but it is here, among you, that the truth lies. I have entered the tower, discovered its hidden mechanism, and seen the chamber within, a sanctuary of Lord Henry's design, filled with artifacts and a safe that guards something of great value. But it is not the safe alone that interests Hercule Poirot. It is the hands that have sought to open it. A murmur rippled through the room, quickly stifled. Lady Eleanor's eyes widened, but she said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. Poirot's gaze swept over the group, lingering on each face as if reading the thoughts behind their masks. "Mademoiselle Wentworth," he said, turning to Clara, "you have been most reticent, but the time for silence is past. The scent of lavender, it follows you like a shadow, and it was present in the tower. The footprint by the door, it matches the size of your shoe. And the housemaid, she saw you near the tower 2 nights ago, not searching for a lost brooch, but standing by the door, as if drawn to its secrets. Will you tell us why?" Clara's face drained of colour, and her hands twisted her handkerchief into a knot. I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "I told you I was looking for my brooch." Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. "Non, mademoiselle. The brooch, it is a fiction, and a poor one. You were seen, and the evidence, it does not lie. Speak now, or the truth will be more painful when it emerges." Clara's shoulders slumped, and a sob escaped her lips. "Oh, very well," she cried, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean any harm, I swear it. Lord Henry, before he died, he gave me a key to the tower. He said it was for safekeeping, that it held his greatest treasure. He told me never to use it unless the family was in danger. I kept it hidden all these years, but recently I heard rumours, whispers that someone else was trying to get in. I went to the tower to check, to make sure the secret was safe." A gasp rippled through the room. Lady Eleanor leaned forward, her voice sharp. "A key? Clara, why did you never tell me?" "I was sworn to secrecy," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "Lord Henry made me promise. He said the tower's contents could ruin the family if they fell into the wrong hands." "What contents?" Sir Reginald demanded, his voice booming. "What nonsense is this? Henry was a fool, locking away trinkets and calling them treasures." "Trinkets, perhaps," Poirot interjected, his voice cutting through the Colonel's bluster. "But treasures to someone. Mademoiselle Wentworth, this key, where is it now?" Clara hesitated, then reached into her pocket, producing a small, ornate key, its brass surface etched with intricate patterns. "Here," she said, holding it out with trembling hands. "I kept it close, always." Poirot took the key, examining it with care. "Most interesting," he murmured. "And you say you entered the tower to protect its secret. Did you open the safe?" "No," Clara said, her voice rising. "I couldn't. I don't know the combination. I only checked the door to see if it had been tampered with." Poirot nodded, slipping the key into his pocket. "Merci, mademoiselle. Your confession, it is a step toward the truth. But there is more to this puzzle." He turned to Victor Grayson, whose smile had faded slightly. "Monsieur Grayson, you are a man of the world, an archaeologist accustomed to uncovering hidden things. The tower, with its artifacts, must be of great interest to you. Did you perhaps seek to explore it for yourself?" Grayson's laugh was light, but it rang hollow. "Monsieur Poirot, you flatter me. I'm a scholar, not a burglar. The tower's intriguing, I'll admit, but I've no interest in breaking into it. My work is in the deserts of Egypt, not the backyards of Devon." "And yet," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing, "a cufflink bearing your initials was found near the tower's door yesterday morning, dropped perhaps in haste. Can you explain this?" Grayson's composure faltered, his hand instinctively touching his cuff. "A cufflink? I must have lost it during a walk. The grounds are vast, Monsieur Poirot. Things get misplaced." "Indeed," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "But the grounds, they are not so vast that a cufflink travels to the tower's doorstep by chance. You were there, monsieur, and I think you sought more than a pleasant stroll." Before Grayson could respond, Beatrice stood, her eyes blazing. "This is all very dramatic, Monsieur Poirot, But you're missing the obvious. Father's the one with motive. He's been selling off family heirlooms to pay his debts. Paintings, silver, even mother's jewellery. If there's a treasure in the tower, he'd be the first to sniff it out. Sir Reginald's face purpled, and he took a step toward his daughter. How dare you, Beatrice? I've done nothing but protect this family's name, while you prance about with your sharp tongue and no respect. Enough! Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the tension sharp as a blade. This bickering achieves nothing. Monsieur Poirot, what is in the safe? You've seen the tower. Tell us. Poirot raised a hand, his expression serene. Patience, madame. The safe remains locked, its combination a mystery. But I assure you, the truth is near. The key, the cufflink, the lavender. These are the threads of a tapestry, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall weave them together. Dr. Vance, who had been silent, cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. Monsieur Poirot, surely this is all speculation. The tower could hold nothing but old papers, worthless to anyone but a historian. Perhaps, Poirot said, his gaze locking onto the physician's. But papers, they can hold power. Power to change fortunes, to break hearts, to destroy lives. You, Doctor, knew Lord Henry well. Did he ever speak of such papers? Vance's handkerchief twisted in his hands. No, he said quickly. Henry was private about his work. I only treated his ailments, nothing more. Poirot nodded, but his eyes told Vance he was unconvinced. Very well, he said, addressing the room. We shall reconvene tomorrow, when I hope to open the safe and reveal its contents. Until then, I advise you all to be cautious. The truth, it has a way of stirring unrest. As the guests dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the vast hall, Hastings leaned toward Poirot. Well, Poirot, that was a bombshell. Clara with a key. And Grayson's cufflink. Do you think he's our man? Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. Not so fast, mon ami. The key, it explains Clara's presence, but not her fear. The cufflink, it points to Grayson, but not his purpose. And there is still the matter of the safe. We are close, Hastings, but the final piece eludes us. He patted his pocket, where the key rested, and his mind turned to the tower. The confession had illuminated one corner of the mystery, but the shadows remained, and Poirot knew that the next day would bring them into the light, or plunge them deeper into darkness. Chapter 7. The Final Revelation. The evening sky over Blackthorn Manor was a canvas of deepening indigo, the fog having retreated to reveal a scattering of stars that glinted like cold, distant eyes. The ivory tower stood sentinel in the twilight, its pale stone absorbing the last rays of light with an almost spectral glow. Inside the manor, the atmosphere was charged with a tension that crackled like static, as if the very air anticipated the unravelling of secrets long buried. Hercule Poirot, his demeanour as composed as ever, had requested the household gather in the tower itself, a bold move that had elicited gasps and murmurs of protest, but none dared refuse the little Belgian detective whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. The chamber within the tower was lit by a single lantern, its flame casting flickering shadows across the shelves of ancient books and curious artefacts. The iron safe stood at the centre, its dial gleaming ominously, as if daring anyone to unlock its secrets. Poirot had arranged for a locksmith from the village to open it earlier that day, a task completed with discreet efficiency under his watchful eye. Now, the safe's door stood ajar, and on a small table beside it lay a single envelope, its wax seal broken, its contents waiting to be revealed. The household stood in a loose circle, their faces a gallery of apprehension and curiosity. Lady Eleanor Blackthorn, her elegance undiminished despite the strain in her eyes, stood nearest the safe, her hands clasped tightly before her. Sir Reginald Blackthorn, his military bearing rigid, glowered from a corner, his fists clenched as if ready to battle an unseen foe. Beatrice, her auburn hair loose and her expression defiant, leaned against a shelf, her gaze flickering between Poirot and the envelope. Dr. Malcolm Vance, his spectacles fogged with nervous perspiration, shifted his weight from foot to foot, while Clara Wentworth, clutching her ever-present handkerchief, seemed to shrink into herself, her eyes darting to the door as if longing to flee. Victor Grayson, his usual charm subdued, stood with arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the envelope with an intensity that belied his casual posture. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice resonant in the confined space, "we stand at the heart of the mystery, the Ivory Tower, where Lord Henry Blackthorne concealed a truth that has stirred fear and greed among you. Tonight, that truth shall be laid bare, for Hercule Poirot leaves no secret unturned." He lifted the envelope, its edges worn but intact, and held it aloft. "This," he said, "is Lord Henry's final testament, a will written in secret and hidden within this safe. But it is not the will you know, Madame Blackthorne, the one that named you sole heir. This document, it tells a different story." Lady Eleanor's breath caught, her pearls clicking as her hand tightened around them. "Another will? That's impossible. Henry left everything to me." His solicitor confirmed it. "Oui, madame," Poirot said, his green eyes gleaming in the lantern light. "But Lord Henry was a man of caution, and he foresaw threats to his legacy. This will, it names Mademoiselle Beatrice as his sole heir, disinheriting both you and Sir Reginald." Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Me? But why? I was never close to Uncle Henry. He barely spoke to me in his final years." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice remained steady. "Because Mademoiselle, Lord Henry discovered a truth about his family, a truth so dangerous that he hid it here, in this tower, and entrusted its protection to Mademoiselle Wentworth. But someone else sought this truth, someone willing to kill to keep it hidden." He turned to Dr. Vance, whose face had gone ashen. "Docteur, you were Lord Henry's physician, privy to his health and, I suspect, his secrets. You knew of this will, did you not? And you knew that its revelation would alter the fortunes of this family." Vance's handkerchief fell to the floor, his hands trembling violently. I don't know what you mean," he stammered. "I only treated Henry's illness. He died of heart failure, nothing more." "Non," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the physician's protest like a blade. "Heart failure, it is a convenient diagnosis, but not the truth. Lord Henry was poisoned, slowly, methodically, with a substance that mimicked natural decline. You, doctor, administered it, believing it would protect Lady Eleanor's inheritance and your own position in this household." A cry broke from Lady Eleanor, her composure shattering. "Malcolm, is this true? How could you?" Vance's shoulders slumped, and he sank onto a chair, his face crumpling. I didn't mean for it to go so far," he whispered. "Henry was going to reveal the new will. It would have ruined Eleanor, left her with nothing. I thought a small dose, just enough to weaken him, to delay things. But he grew worse. And then he was gone. I never meant to kill him." The room was silent, the weight of the confession pressing down like a physical force. Sir Reginald's face was thunderous, but he said nothing, his eyes fixed on Vance with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. Beatrice, tears glistening in her eyes, turned away, her shoulders shaking. Poirot continued, his voice unrelenting. "You acted out of loyalty, Doctor, but also fear. Fear of losing your place, your influence. You knew the will was in the tower, and when rumours surfaced of its existence, you grew desperate. You watched the tower, hoping to prevent its discovery." He turned to Victor Grayson, whose smile had vanished entirely. "And you, Monsieur Grayson, you suspected the will's existence, did you not? Your cufflink, found near the tower, betrays your presence. You are no stranger to hidden treasures, and you saw in the tower an opportunity, not for family honor, but for profit. You planned to find the will and use it, perhaps to blackmail Lady Eleanor or to sell its secrets to the highest bidder. Grayson's eyes narrowed, but he maintained his composure. You have no proof, Poirot. A cufflink proves nothing. Perhaps not, Poirot said, but the wax, the footprint, the whispers in the night, they point to a conspiracy. You were not alone, monsieur. Mademoiselle Wentworth, your key allowed access, but your fear kept you from acting alone. You confided in someone, did you not? Clara's sob broke the silence, and she nodded, her voice barely audible. I told Dr. Vance, she whispered. I was frightened. I thought he could help protect the secret. Poirot nodded, his expression grave. And so the circle closes. The will, it is the heart of this tragedy, but it is the human heart, its greed, its loyalty, its fear that has woven this web. Lord Henry's death was no accident, and the tower's secret has claimed more than he intended. He handed the envelope to Beatrice, who took it with trembling hands. Mademoiselle, this is your inheritance, not just of wealth, but of truth. Use it wisely. Lady Eleanor rose, her face pale but resolute. Monsieur Poirot, what happens now? Poirot's gaze was steady. The police have been summoned, madame. They wait outside, thanks to Captain Hastings's foresight. Dr. Vance will answer for his crime, and Monsieur Grayson, I suspect, will find his ambitions curtailed. The tower's secret is yours to resolve, as a family. As the sound of footsteps echoed from below, signalling the arrival of the police, the household stood in stunned silence. Dr. Vance, his head bowed, was led away, his confession hanging like a pall over the room. Grayson, his charm replaced by a grim resignation, followed, casting a final glance at the safe. Clara, weeping softly, was comforted by Beatrice, who seemed to find strength in her new role. Poirot stepped back, his work complete, though his eyes lingered on the ivory statuette on the shelf, its hooded figure a silent witness to the drama. The tower has spoken, he said softly, and its truth, it is both a burden and a liberation. Chapter 8. The Departure. The morning broke over Blackthorn Manor with a clarity that seemed to mock the turmoil of the previous night. The fog which had cloaked the estate in mystery for days had lifted at last, revealing a landscape of rolling hills bathed in the pale gold of an autumn sun. The ivory tower, once a sentinel of secrets, stood silent, its pale stone catching the light with a quiet dignity, as if relieved of its burden. Inside, the manor, the air was heavy with the aftermath of revelation, the household moving through their routines with the subdued demeanour of those who have witnessed a storm's passing. Hercule Poirot stood in the great hall, his small, meticulous figure a picture of composure as he adjusted his hat in the mirror, his moustache a perfect crescent of waxed precision. Captain Hastings, beside him, fumbled with his coat buttons, his honest face reflecting a mix of relief and lingering unease. Their bags, neatly packed by the manor's staff, waited by the door, and the Rolls-Royce that would carry them back to London gleamed on the gravel drive outside. Well, Poirot, Hastings said, his voice low as he glanced toward the staircase where Beatrice Blackthorn stood, bidding farewell to a departing guest. You've done it again. The tower's secret is out, Vance is in custody, and Grayson's schemes have been nipped in the bud. But I must say, it's left a bitter taste. Poor Lady Eleanor, losing her inheritance and learning her trusted doctor was a murderer. Poirot's eyes, sharp and green, softened slightly. Oui, mon ami. The truth. It is often bitter, but it is also a purge. The Blackthorn family, they are wounded, but they will heal. Mademoiselle Beatrice, she has the strength to lead them, and the will. It gives her the means to do so. Beatrice approached, her auburn hair tied back in a simple knot, her expression a blend of gratitude and resolve. She carried the envelope containing Lord Henry's will, its edges now creased from handling. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady despite the shadows under her eyes. "I cannot thank you enough. You've given us back our future, though it's not the one we expected. I'll see to it that the estate is managed well for Uncle Henry's sake." Poirot bowed, his movements precise. "Mademoiselle, you have inherited more than wealth. You have inherited responsibility. Use it with wisdom, and the Blackthorn name will endure." She nodded, a faint smile breaking through her solemnity. "I will, and I'll see that Clara is cared for. She meant no harm, only loyalty to Uncle Henry. A loyalty that was misguided," Poirot said gently, "but sincere. She will find her place, I think, under your guidance." As Beatrice returned to the manor, Lady Eleanor emerged, her elegance undimmed despite the strain etched into her features. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You have my gratitude, though it comes with sorrow. I never imagined Malcolm capable of such a thing, nor Henry of such secrecy. But you have brought clarity, and for that I am indebted." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, the clarity, it is my duty. The heart of man, it is complex, but the truth, it is simple. You will rebuild, and the tower, it will stand as a reminder, not of secrets, but of resilience." Lady Eleanor offered a faint nod, then turned, back to the manor, her figure retreating into its shadowed halls. The butler, ever impassive, opened the door to the Rolls-Royce, and Poirot and Hastings stepped outside, the crisp air carrying the scent of damp earth and fading roses. As the car pulled away, Hastings leaned back, his gaze lingering on the ivory tower as it receded into the distance. "I still can't quite believe it, Poirot," he said. "A hidden lever, a secret will, a murder, all tucked away in that tower. How did you piece it all together?" Poirot's lips curled into a satisfied smile, his gloved hands resting on his walking stick. "The little grey cells, mon ami, they see the pattern where others see only chaos. The wax, it spoke of a candlelit intruder. The lavender, it pointed to Mademoiselle Wentworth. The cufflink, it betrayed Monsieur Grayson's curiosity. And the footprint, it confirmed a woman's presence, though it was the doctor's fear that revealed the poison. Each clue, it was a thread, and I, Hercule Poirot, wove them into the truth." Hastings chuckled, shaking his head. "You make it sound so simple, but I'd have been lost in the fog without you. What about the statuette, though? That ivory figure in the tower? It gave me the shivers. Was it just another of Lord Henry's oddities?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with a hint of mischief. "Perhaps, Hastings, or perhaps it was a symbol, a guardian of the secret, carved to watch over the will. Lord Henry, he was a man of drama, none, but its purpose it is fulfilled. The tower is silent now." The car wound through the Devon lanes, the manor fading into the haze of memory. Hastings glanced at Poirot, who sat with an air of quiet triumph, his mind already turning to the next challenge. "Back to London, then," Hastings said. "Any plans for a rest after this?" "Rest?" Poirot said, raising an eyebrow. "The little grey cells, they do not rest, Hastings. There is always another puzzle, another secret to uncover. And Hercule Poirot, he is always ready." As the Rolls-Royce sped toward the city, the ivory tower stood alone, its pale stone catching the last light of day. Its secrets were laid bare, its shadows dispelled, but its presence lingered in the minds of those who had passed beneath its gaze, a monument to the truths that only a man like Poirot could unveil.